Hi, this video is a question for Dan McClellan, or a response to Dan McClellan. This is in response to his video, McClellan 2813. It's pretty good. I'd recommend go watching it and following his channel. I mostly agree with what he says. I take issue here. I kind of want to posit a claim here, Dan. I think the term data over dogma is in fact a dogma that you and I just accept. Like, what we think is a fact is a sort of sense of a dogma. We have to accept sort of this idea of what we think a fact is. So when you say that people reject facts or reject the fact of the Bible, the contradictions of the Bible and stuff like that, I think what we're leaving out maybe, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, I think that there is fact there. Like, they have evidence, again, in their own mind, probably through personal experience, that God exists in them and they have some personal connection with God, and therefore, because they believe God to be perfect and true and whatever, he can't contradict. They have made this claim already. Yes, it's a dogmatic position, similar to the fact that any scientific dogmatic position is that we have to sort of reject God. Not necessarily reject God, but like we have to conduct scientific research in a way that presumes somewhat that God doesn't exist, right? Because if God just existed and we accepted all the sort of proposals that God presents, then we might not even need to like do sociological studies and stuff like that. The science and study of religion kind of definitely relies on a dogmatic scientific view that we accept, and I think is the right choice. I'm not trying to say that I'm anti-science. I'm just saying that, like, I think it's important that we actually talk about how they're both dogmas that we are accepting here, and I think if I'm correct in saying, because everything is identity politics at the end of the day, and I'm a social constructivist, so I firmly believe that us beholding to the academic consensus is a dogma. And I think the issue that you, or, well, especially me, but maybe you as well, have with apologists is that they're trying to have their cake and eat it too. They're trying to say that they have this dogma for a love of logic and reason and whatever, and they want to perform that towards their audiences. But then they also have to reject those principles the second they're pushed on them with the actual data that academics are actually doing, which I think is actually a good way to define what an apologist is. It's someone who is essentially playing those two sides and trying to be like, oh, well, I actually support science up until it contradicts me. So I think we might agree on that. Is like that's the difficulty with apologists, is that they contradict themselves. They are inconsistent with their own dogmas and beliefs. But I do think that there is something to be said, though, that asserting that something is true regardless of facts might actually be like important here, because what we're saying is that these people believe something to be true, i.e. they believe it to be a fact regardless of what we say is scientific facts. So I think, like, and they have evidence for it. Like, these people have personal experiences with what they refer to as God. So it's not as if that they might not be unscientific in that way. They probably are. They just experienced God, and that made them believe these things. Now, I think where you and I might agree, or me and other social constructivists might agree, is that we would say, well, the God that they're constructing, the things that they're believing, the identity politics that you're identifying here, is that is socially constructed. It's just whatever, like, the fact that I grew up in, a specific kind of political or social situation means that my God kind of affirms those things that I grew up believing, which a social constructivist will just point that out, is that we're socially constructing those situations, and therefore the dogmas we have are actually incredibly biased. However, it's still a dogma. I mean, I think that there's still both dogmas either way. But I think I take issue with your claim that they don't interrogate the contradictions in the Bible, in the sense that, like, I agree, they don't interrogate them, but because they don't have to. They think it's true 100% of the time, every day. It's true because of their personal experience with God. So they have no reason to. There is no evidence that could change their mind. And yeah, that's unscientific. It's unlike scientific in the traditional sense, but it is also, it's a dogma they accept, but the reverse is a dogma we'd have to accept. And I think the right dogma. I think it makes sense to accept a scientific dogma of some sort. Um, but it's still a dogma we have to accept. And then furthermore, I think I would push you on saying that, like, talking about the text in such a way, like, it feels to me that pointing out somebody's being dogmatic in regards to the Bible or any other text feels like a misstep, because almost any position in relation to a text is going to be dogmatic. It's similar to the scientific claim, where, I mean, it feels redundant to point that out. That it is, I mean, maybe it's not. Maybe it's not redundant because maybe people don't realize they're being dogmatic. But, I mean, we are making a dogma choice. The text is only what we make of it. So I think it's good to point out when an apologist, like, affirms or is, like, trying to say something that is misogynistic. It's good to point out that actually your dogmas are getting you to say something that's your identity politics, something that is clearly, from your identity politics, is clearly misogynistic or something like that. And they might just be like, they might say, no, it's actually the facts. And we could just be like, well, no, it's the dogma, it's your identity politics that are coming into play here. I think misogyny is actually a really good example for this, because a lot of apologists will point to the Bible for being misogynistic when, yeah, I mean, whether that's a good interpretation of the Bible or not, it shouldn't matter. Like, the whole point is that they're playing into identity politics. So the truth of the Bible doesn't matter in competition with this conception, is that we're making a dogma choice either way. I think us pointing out that they are being sexist or misogynistic is actually really good, whereas just calling them dogmatic, it feels like that blow doesn't hit, because obviously they're being dogmatic. They're making a decision based off their identity politics, which is always going to be dogmatic.